Hello and welcome back, viewers. This is UnknownSpiral. I decided, since I haven't done this before, I'm just going to show you a bit of what it was like doing this song, because the process was a lot different than how I usually do things. This isn't actually the project we are going to be working with today. You can see at the top, this is the title of our song, but we're going to be doing something a little different. We're on this project because this is what the default colors of tracks are. Green means MIDI, blue means audio, and then purple means MIDI and audio. I don't know why blue plus green does not equal purple, but whatever. Anyways, the reason I'm showing you this before we go to the actual thing is just to kind of show you the ratio of MIDI to audio here. And mind you, none of the audio is actually loops. So in Logic, all of the loop library, well, except for a couple things, I'm not sure why, but a couple of them turn into MIDI tracks. But most of them, of the thousands of tracks, are all blue. So, you know, you see all these words scrolling past, those are all different tracks, loop tracks. And a lot of beginner musicians, like how I started, your whole song is just made out of loops. So just a whole bunch of stuff like that. And that turns out blue. But none of the blue on this are actually loops. These are all sound effects that I got from Splice. And as you can see, none of them are looping. You can see these bracket bends. That means that the track is repeating. And none of these are doing that. And none of these blue tracks here are doing that. These are all sound effects. And they're just textures and stuff that you add to the song to add a little bit more. It's very hard to hear, but little stuff. Little stuff. And that's all of the blue track here, except for there's a couple down in this building, which I'll show you what they do later, but it's just to create these drum bits right before the drop. That book. And that's it. There's no loops in this. All of the green is MIDI. For you people who don't know music, MIDI is basically a computer signal that is used that is used by MIDI trigger. So like keyboards, like synth keyboards and the launchpad, those are MIDI triggers, and that sends in a signal to the computer to play these notes at these parts at this pitch. So at this note, you know, like A, C, flat, bitch, whatever, fuck that shit. Yeah. So this is just to kind of show you it's mostly just a MIDI track, which means that I'm not using this shit. Like, Northern Lights didn't use any of that either. Wind Waker was kind of like a half and half. But anyways, let's get to the more aesthetically pleasing section. Yeah. As you can see at the top, the title... How? I have a cold, sorry. The title has changed. This is Riverways, which was the original title for the song. As you can see, I rainbowed the whole thing because I felt like it. I've never changed the tracks' colors from their default colors, being that green versus blue, and they all equal purple. Strangely enough, it still equals purple. But yeah, I just decided to change the colors because it looks a lot cooler. Yeah, just rainbow cycles everywhere. Alright, let's get into more rational size, so we can actually take a look at stuff. Yeah. So there's 63 tracks total. Mind you, that doesn't actually mean there's like 64 layers of crap. A lot of these 64 layers is stuff like this, like summing tracks. So a summing track is it plays... this one's a bad example. Let me find another. Subcompo. Alright, let's look at this. So, what the summing track does is you can... put layers, track layers, but only put one actual MIDI track down and have multiple instruments play that same one that are all under that. So all the ones in that folder, in that stack. So you can see the sub combo, it has this here. And it uses these two instruments. And it adds that layer. So it's literally just sub here, and then you add this. Adds a little bit more tone, and the other way around. It's just a synth, add some sub. So that's what the summing tracks do. Another thing a summing track does is, as you can see here, these are software effects, and if you want to lower the load on your CPU, what you do is you use the summing tracks, and you put all the effects on the summing track, and it will affect everything below it. A good example of using it for effects is if we go down to reverb effects, you can see I have a bunch of reverb and doublers on here. If I put that on every single individual track here separately, it would kill my CPU. As you notice, there are some independent effects here. There's EQs, there's extra reverb, there's all this shit. But it does help to not have to put your effects independently on every single track, and that's what some of those 63 tracks are. As you can see, I sorted it by melody, so like I sorted it pretty logically. So all my melody bits, let's just take all of these. So all the things that would be the leads throughout the whole song. These are mostly all here. And this. Just throughout the whole song, that's where I put my melodies. I put it into these, so there's summing tracks and there's folder. No, there's summing stack and a folder stack. The folder stacks are more just organization. So all my melody, that's one folder. All my background parts that aren't chords or effects or drums are in one part. All my chords are in one part. All my effects, sound effects, and all my drums are in one part. And the background parts, I'm just going to individually do this because summing is not good for looking at this. All the background stuff like that. Pretty simple. I'm not actually going to show you the process of how I made the song because I just recorded that and that took 24 minutes. I don't want to do this for 24 minutes. And all the chords, if I just select all the summings and the bright, that should select all this. All the chord stuff, I'm not a musically trained person. I'm a rhythmically trained person. I'm a drummer of 8 years. I am not a piano player or any of that. I have started playing bass guitar and piano, but I don't know much about theory. So chords are hard for me. So a lot of these just was experimenting. Also, doing the whole thing in C major is really easy because that means you don't really have sharps or flats unless you feel like it, which in that case it becomes out of key, and I forgot. It's a thing that a lot of jazz players do most of the time, and I forgot what it's called, but whatever. Now that we're up here, let's take a look at this. The beats per minute is 145 if that matters to you. It's 128 bars, and it's approximately 3.5 minutes. Also, it shows the CPU load here, and even though it rarely goes past half, the CPU overloads like hell on here all the time, and it's annoying. But yeah, so a lot of the chords were either something that I heard in a song, and I kept listening to that part, and I tried to kind of copy it and then change it slightly to make it fit more into my song's feeling. A lot of the feeling of this song specifically is kind of like a major 7 feel, and even though the chords aren't everywhere, all of the melody bits and all that, it has kind of that feeling. So this is what major 7 is. So this is C major, and that's your 1, 2, 3. But major 7 is obviously you add that 7, and it sounds like this. It has a little tinge of sadness to it, is one way that you'd call it. But yeah, even if it's not a chord, it has those notes specifically throughout it, and it gives it that sound. Actually, you know what? Let's take a look at that for a second. It sounds very cheerful, but the end is more contemplating kind of feeling. It just kind of, it has a little bit of an undertone to it. Anyways, that's enough of the chords. Drums, most of the drums are actually technically audio tracks too, and technically everything is. But the reason that these are all MIDI tracks. If you remember back at the beginning when I was showing you that in the drums there are these two sections with audio, and I've already showed you what that is. But the rest of these have actually been samples, so samples from Splice, except for the hi-hats. The hi-hats are samples from inside of the Apple library, but samples from Splice, where you take the audio sample and I put it into a drum machine in here, and then you take the sample. Let's go to here. So you take the sample and you just throw it in here, and then it becomes part of this, and then you just program it across, rhythmically programming it. The reason I didn't do it for these two is because it only repeats twice. Programming is better so that you can actually drag it across and turn it into a loop by repeating it. That way you don't have to keep placing it over and over, but it's faster if there's only two instances of it to just take this and then copy it manually. But for the rest of them, I used the drum machines. And basically, it just plays the sample wherever you place this. So if I do that, that's what I would do. So a lot of these are audio samples that I took from an external source, but I put it into the drum machines. That way we can have all these this stuff. Which, think about it, if we had just the audio tracks, so the samples themselves raw, and tried to do that, it would take a hell of a lot longer than it did just to program it and then drag it and copy it across. Right? So that's for the drums. The effects, this is what was the most different. So throughout the whole song, I used third-party effects, and that was the first time that I did that. Third-party effects are effects that you buy externally, and it VTS, they're VTS, and it goes into the DAW, and you can use it. You can use it in here. So there's custom reverb on a lot of these. And there's a doubler, which basically creates a double instance. It doesn't really change the volume, but a double instance, you can change the rate slightly, you can change the pitch slightly, and it makes it sound kind of like a chorus effect, like there's two people singing moderately instead of one person singing loud. You'll notice that there's two slightly different voices, and they sound slightly different. It adds more color, and it adds more taste to the sound. So there was that. There's also the use of just generally a lot of external effects. As you can see, a lot of these have like file names. These aren't things that you'd put on, like for this one. In the entire thing, there's only one thing that comes from one audio piece that comes from the library of Apple, and you can tell it has a picture and it has a proper name, and the rest of these are all dashes and underscores because these are actually files. So I took these from Splice and I put them in places where they sound good. A lot of the effects in here, especially the textures and these two, so you can see how it has like this file name and the audio 1718. These are very subtle effects, but without them, it sounds a little more empty. There are more strong effects like this one that is ridiculously obvious. Like without that, it doesn't sound wrong without it, but it's definitely empty. Let's add that back in. It gives that fuzz, and it's very obvious. But these textures, they're not obvious at all. They're there. They're definitely there, and when you play it without them, it sounds okay, but it adds like a realness, like a noise, as if it was actually being recorded. These two, this is what I actually really wanted to focus on. These two over here, I recorded these. using a microphone and a guitar. So I think 17 is the guitar, 18 is my voice. So these used a real pedal board as well as internal effects. So as you can see, this is the reverb I have, the Valhalla Room, as well as a stereo spread and some EQing. EQing is equalization, and that changes the frequencies. It brings out different frequencies and takes them away so that it balances out your track and it sounds better. This, I used a guitar and a pick, and I put it through a pedal board and put on some octave effects, so it added some extra octave layers, as well as a real-life reverb. Now, real-life reverb will always be more powerful than plug-in reverb because, you know, you can fit a whole lot more power into an actual thing than you can a little program. So what I did is it went through that, and I recorded it, and it kind of went under, and it's a very ambient effect. It doesn't sound like a guitar at all, it just sounds like echoes, and then I play some extra effects on it. So let's take off all of these, so this is what it sounds like when I was recording. So you can hear, it kind of sounds like hitting strings. And it sounds absolutely nightmarish on its own, but it adds a little bit. It adds a little bit to the mix. Especially during the drop and stuff like that. Just by playing C, like hitting the C with the pick, and then dragging across the strings and hitting a B, it gives alone, it sounds very quiet. When I bring it back down to normal volume, it doesn't sound like much, but it gives a lot of ambience. As well as the voice. The voice went through the same effects, plus a fuzz. I toned down the real-life reverb and did some more software reverb, as well as a microphaser and an exciter. And again, it's a very ambient sound. It doesn't sound like a voice. And also, since I have a cold, when I was doing this, my voice was very weak, so it gave an automatic tremolo effect, or a vibrato. And this just kind of goes throughout the entire song, and these two just add a little more ambience to it. So yeah, that's basically all the 63 layers of this track. Yeah, I hope this gives you a little bit more insight to, you know, for people who don't make music, this is kind of what it's about. You use a lot of, especially with electronic, it's a lot of MIDI, it's a fuck ton of textures and ambience below it, and it just kind of fills it in. Yeah.